Taking charge of our final session is Nora Bateson, who is the president of the International Bateson Institute and a trustee of the Institute of General Semantics. So take it away, Nora.
Hey, thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm arriving in a kind of a flurry of confusion, but here nonetheless with my heart always there for the General Semantics gatherings. And our final session is called Mind and Nature, appropriately. And our first session, reading Shannon and Weaver's model of communication backward, 3 scholarly misconceptions. And there's 3 scholars here. We've got Zachary Sapienza, who's a professor of communication from Grand Canyon, and Aaron Veenstra from Florida, professor of journalism, and Delaware Arif from University of North Alabama, and also professor of journalism and media. So because there's 3 of you, I guess we still have a 15-minute slot. So, keep your inputs organized. And I invite you to begin. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Nora. And I just want to thank Lance for hosting this IGS symposium. It is very appreciated, and it's a delight to be here speaking with all of you today. So thank you very much. Let me share my presentation here. Bear with me for 1 second. All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, the year 2024 marked the 75th anniversary of what scholars commonly refer to as Shannon and Weaver's model of communication. In recognition of this recent milestone, our paper revisits Shannon and Weaver's model to gauge its current value for communication and media scholars. Inspired by Ullo and Zamkli's 1999 study on Harold Laswell's legacy to the discipline of political science, we pose a similar question regarding Claude Shannon. If one only knows about Claude Shannon by reading the citations or references to his model of communication, what would his legacy seem to be in communication and media studies? Now, I'm sure most of us are familiar with Shannon and Weaver's model of communication. It has graced hundreds, if not thousands, of introductory communication textbooks since the field's origins and is still being used predominantly today. It is often one of the first concepts that communication students learn in communication courses. So, we kind of wanted to figure out, how has this changed over the last 75 years, and how is Claude Shannon being represented in regards to this model? And what we've found is, unfortunately for Shannon, his legacy in communication studies, particularly in the disciplines of mass communication and media studies, seems solely tied to his graphic model, one that is forever intertwined with Warren Weaver. At best, Claude Shannon's legacy for most communication and media studies students would appear to be the equivalent of a musician who had a one-hit wonder. Shannon appeared on the scene, made a model with Weaver, and then disappeared again. At worst, Shannon was a simple communication scholar that didn't understand the complexities and nuances of communication. Indeed, this latter narrative is told far more often. So here you can see a picture of Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver. And of course, here is the book, The Mathematical Theory of Communication, which was written in 1949. Now, one doesn't have to dig deep into the scholarly literature to find lots of criticisms with Shannon and Weaver's model. These include arguments such as it's linear, that it promotes passive audiences, that it doesn't incorporate feedback into it, that it conflates meaning with content, that it ignores context, that it treats encoding and decoding the same, that it doesn't account for interpretation in the communication process, that it's instrumental in nature, that it doesn't account for phatic communication, that it doesn't account for differences in power relationships, that it ignores the medium being used, and that it doesn't account for dynamic change. It is often, quite frequently, associated with the transmission model. Now, many of those criticisms that I just pointed out really seem unfounded and unwarranted when we consider that there are three misconceptions regarding Shannon and Weaver's model. Those are, first, that Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver were co-authors. Second, that Claude Shannon was a communication scholar. And finally, that Shannon and Weaver's model of communication explains the communication process. In fact, if we actually accept that none of those three premises are true, we start to get a much better and thorough understanding of what Claude Shannon was trying to accomplish with his diagram of a communication system. So let's address misconception one. Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver were co-authors. In actuality, Weaver only wrote the introduction, which was an expanded and slightly more technical version of an article that he wrote for Scientific American earlier in the year. The rest of the book was comprised of a two-part article that Shannon had written under the title of A Mathematical Theory of Communication and published in the Bell System Technical Journal the year prior. The book, which was published through the University of Illinois Press, had two primary sections. Weaver's revised introduction to his article that originally published in Scientific American, and Shannon's original two-part article with some minor corrections. On the first page of Weaver's introduction is a footnote that explains how he solely wrote the introduction, which provides his interpretation of Shannon's work. This is also made abundantly clear on the table of contents, which credits each author for their own sections. In fact, the only thing that is co-authored in the entire book together is a one-page unmarked preface, which ironically also highlights the origins of each section. In conflating the respective roles that Shannon and Weaver played in developing information theory and the book, The Mathematical Theory of Communication, scholars create a narrative that Shannon and Weaver were interested in advancing scholarship about human communication in higher education. That is, in fact, untrue. That gets me to misconception number two. Claude Shannon was a communication scholar. Nothing could be really further from the truth. Many scholars think of Claude Shannon as a simple communication scholar rather than as one of the first and potentially most important telecommunication scholars of all time. Shannon developed his model while working at Bell Telephone Labs on issues with signal transmissions with telephones. Shannon, in actuality, held a joint appointment in mathematics and electrical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology after leaving Bell Telephone Labs in 1949. He was not a communication scholar, nor did he teach communication courses. Likewise, Warren Weaver was an executive with the Rockefeller Foundation and the Sloan Kettering Institute on Cancer Research. His background was in biology and the hard sciences. So neither were communication scholars, and it's very misleading when we depict them as such. Now, this gets me finally to misconception 3. Shannon and Weaver's model depicts the communication process. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. At the heart of Claude Shannon's diagram is a communication system. It is a depiction of a communication system rather than of communication in general. And at the heart of this diagram, Shannon describes, excuse me for 1 second, I apologize. Shannon himself labeled it as the schematic diagram of a general communication system, the key word being system. Shannon specifically addresses that he is not concerned with traditional problems in communication by stating in his second paragraph of his introduction that frequently the messages have meaning. These semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant to the engineering problem. Shannon is only concerned with the technical aspects of signal and channel capacities in the reproduction of messages and communication. Many other scholars have also pointed this out over the years. M. Griffith, in 1997, perhaps states it best when he writes, Shannon was somewhat wary about the wholesale application of his mathematical equations to the semantic and pragmatic issues of interpersonal communication. But his hesitation was not shared by Warren Weaver. Weaver, who was solely responsible for advocating that Shannon's mathematical formulas for signal transmissions were applicable to communication studies in general. As such, scholars fail to consider Weaver's distinct role in popularizing information theory into a mainstream metaphor for communication in general. All right, so this gets me to my conclusion. And there's 3 main points that I would like to share here. First, Shannon's diagram still has value as a model of communication if prefaced that it is a metaphor that seeks to explain abstract communication principles through a comparison with communication technology. Communication scholars who continue to treat it as a model of communication rather than a diagram of a communication system obscure its purpose and distorts its value for the field. Most arguments levied against it are assuming it's a model of communication and not a diagram of a communication system. Hence, they don't apply. For example, arguments that it's linear, one-way, center focus really start to seem ridiculous when we realize that its true intentions were to depict a communication system. My second point is communication and media scholars should embrace Shannon. He is responsible for almost everything that we study today, particularly in mass communication and media studies. As Z in 2020 points out, more than 70 years ago, in a single groundbreaking paper, he laid the foundation for the entire communication infrastructure underlying the modern information age. Finally, this gets me to my third point, which is one simply needs to move outside of our field to recognize the degree in which communication and media studies scholars have maligned Shannon's legacy. Shannon is frequently referred to as the father of information age, thanks in part to his mathematical theory of communication. As Z points out, or as Rodney Brooks in 2022 points out, it is one of the most influential papers in engineering and argues that Claude Shannon didn't bother predicting the future. He just went ahead and invented it. Shannon won numerous awards for his theory. Perhaps the most prestigious was the National Medal of Science in 1966, which was presented by President Lyndon B. Johnson on February 6, 1967. The award noted for brilliant contributions to the mathematical theories of communications and information processing, and for his early and continuing impact on the development of these disciplines. Some other awards received include the Kyoto Prize in 1985, which is one of Japan's most renowned awards, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers Medal of Honor in 1966. Indeed, it is impossible to know how differently the world would look today had it not been for Shannon's mathematical theory of communication. Shannon's theory is the bedrock for all modern telecommunications, and its impact can be seen in diverse applications such as computing, digital communications, data storage, artificial intelligence. As Vesaludis notes, it is remarkable that one person contributes so much to the development of science, but that is exactly what Shannon did. Shannon tried to balance the popularity of his theory versus it being applied in ways in which he didn't intend. If the field of communication is any indication, it was a juggling act that he unfortunately lost. Fortunately, it is up to us to remember what he actually did and the true purpose of his diagram. So we can use it as a model of communication if we want to, but we have to remember that it is a metaphor that seeks to explain communication through communication technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And, it's interesting because you see the same sort of mistakes or, misunderstandings or misuses, maybe is a better way of talking about it with cybernetics in general, that there is this mechanistic systemic model, and it never really was meant to work as a model for life and the living, moving, swishing, blurring world. And yet that confusion has caused all sorts of negation of both the blurring and the necessity of blurring information in communication and in that is living systemic and mechanistic understandings of that systemic process. But let's open it up to the room if anybody wants to add any questions or comments
Nora, we should hold the questions for the
for the end.
end,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, then, thank you so much, Zach. And we're going to just keep moving. And Jaqueline McLeod Rogers is going to join us for Hope with and Without Progress. Jaqueline, are you?
Thanks, Nora.
Yeah,
Let's see if I
thank
can
you.
share the screen.
Yeah, Jaqueline comes from the University of Winnipeg in Canada. She's a professor of rhetoric and writing communications, and has been doing all sorts of beautiful things with media and feminist principles and humanist projects and all sorts of beautiful things. So welcome, Jaqueline.
I'm going to try to share the screen, but it doesn't look like it's cooperating, so I may have to forge ahead. Sans slides. Let me take a look here. Yeah. Hey, have we got action with that?
It's
A little
working.
bit? Okay, thanks.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to see you here. I'm so glad my slides showed up. I came all the way into work to make sure I had better internet coming from Winnipeg rather than speaking from an isolated spot. So here we go. Yeah, I want to talk about visions of hope, hope with and without an ideal of progress. Today, I want to explore the claim that McLuhan's vision of human life was free of an idea of progress, an idea often said to be at the root of modernist thinking, and by extension supposed by some history scholars to have roots in the Christian tradition. I also want to suggest that McLuhan's anti-progressive view, his view that human life has not progressed or enriched over time, is different from the more positive endorsement of progress that's part of general semantics theory. I'm willing to be corrected. I'm willing to be corrected by general semantics experts, but by my reading, within general semantics, the concept of time binding rests on belief in possibility of human progress. As the slide with Lance's definition of time binding conveys, being able to reflect on the past makes it possible to avoid missteps and even to choose better options and outcomes. We humans can accumulate wisdom, weaving bright spots from past insights and discoveries into our repertoire to move human understanding and activity forward. And along with the concept of time binding, the drive to amalgamate art and science, study stands as further evidence of Korzybski's belief in the possibility of human progress. Certainly, seeing the past as a storehouse of riches that we can draw on to improve our understanding undergirds Neil Postman's Building a Bridge to the 18th Century, How the Past Can Improve Our Future, published, I guess, late in last 2000. In this book, he castigates postmodernist relativity for failing to identify a core of essential human values and for removing sensible standards of judgment. He refuses to dismiss the exercise of reason as mere bias and identifies comparative reasoning as part of the Enlightenment legacy whose practice can improve the character of human thought. There's a link between hope and progress in his view, that individuals can seek self-improvement in part through attending to clear thinking and communication, and scaled up that humanity can make progress towards creating a world that nurtures positive collective outcomes. Well, McLuhan takes a different approach. He describes new developments in human life and world culture using words like change, transformation, and reconfiguration. His 4 laws of media convey the nonlinear and non-progressive character of change. The 4 laws will argue that when, quote, when we introduce new media, 4 things inevitably happen. The new media enhance, reverse, retrieve, and obsolesce. When something new is introduced, when there's a new tech innovation, there can be both improvement and atrophy, loss and potential gain. To use figure and ground language, we might say that some elements previously invisible return to the fore, while some fade to the background. So this model, those 4 laws, speaks about change not as upcycling, not as leading to improvement and growth, but as reconfigured repetition. Whenever we get something newly innovated, we give something up. This sense of moving backwards and forwards is captured in the 2 full-page illustrations that appear at the opening of the article, The Invisible Environment, The Future of an Erosion from '67. The very opening pages, I always looked at these and I kind of wondered what they were getting at besides the faceless crowd. But if you look at the movement, the group moves one way in one photo, one full page photo, and then the other way, entirely the other way in another photo. So I think in visual terms, what they're conveying is things will change, but there's not really any forward or upward trajectory, just different forms of motion. We get this idea in words later in that same article, The Invisible Environment. This passage, it's a single paragraph. This passage points out that the future guarantees change, but in it, McLuhan offers no reassurance of improvement. Within this one paragraph, 5 areas of life, big areas, are named as about to transform, so they'll no longer resemble what they've been. You know, I've tried to show them up in yellow. The future of consciousness, the future of childhood, the future of the family, the future of the city, the future of language. Pretty big areas, all of them are changing, eroding to give way to reformation, but you'll note that there's neutrality in this telling, not really any hint of promise running through this passage. It's sort of typical McLuhan voice. no assessment of whether this is for good or whether these changes will be experienced as loss or more gain. Yeah, similarly, I was going to read some of it, but I think it comes through pretty clearly. McLuhan's always leery well, it's one of his statements that he withholds judgment. Similarly, he avoids judgments of inferiority and superiority when he speaks of East and West cultures as having different values and character. He certainly does not portray the West as advanced and the East as comparatively primitive. Indeed, many of his observations admire Eastern culture, not so much for being superior to Western culture as for offering a corrective to Western bias and excess. With the growth of technology and with our excessive reliance on it, McLuhan describes Westerners not as evolved sophisticates, but as a people and culture that have veered too far into dangerous imbalance, leaning too heavily on reason, linearity, tech innovation, and artifice. That McLuhan did not embrace a view of human progress is captured in his dramatic prediction of possible futures from the Playboy interview. To quote directly from its end, there are grounds for both pessimism and optimism. The extension of man's consciousness induced by electric media could conceivably usher in the millennium, but it also holds the potential for realizing the Antichrist. Yeats' rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. For McLuhan, good and bad outcomes are always open possibilities. Yet on the whole, he's never overly optimistic that humans will exercise understanding and control needed for good outcomes. Well, this in mind, his awareness of storm and precipice is always attendant. Some might find Neil Postman's characterization of McLuhan as a figure of optimism a bit puzzling or inexact. In a foreword introducing the reissue of Philip Marchand's biography of McLuhan, it was 1997, the reissue, Neil Postman called McLuhan, quote, a prophet of hope. And he noted that young people were drawn to McLuhan because they found in him a voice of hope. I think what Postman is picking up on here is not that McLuhan offered simple reassurances, but rather that he recommended a path worth taking to encourage humans to adopt technologies in balanced ways, not ways necessarily leading to an improved human circumstance or condition, but to reactivating dormant senses and capacities and rebalancing the human sensorium. He encouraged individuals to think and feel more, yet the sort of self-development he pictured was only loosely linked to learning from the past and more focused on opening and activating innate yet dormant human capacities, making them figural rather than recessive. He does not conform to standard thinking about progress where something more new is attained, where we are aspiring to perfectibility, where development might be plotted on a linear course. I don't have time. Do I have about 2 more minutes, Nora?
Yes, you have
Okay.
3 more.
I'll use my 2 minutes wisely and quickly because I'm going to ask a question that many of you might be wondering. Why does this matter? Why would we look closely at McLuhan's position on whether humans are capable or not of progress? So imagining human history as unfolding progressively can buoy up human spirit and purpose. As I noted in the opening, I think this is the approach developed by General Semantics and by Postman. They believe in human progress, and then I correct this, I think, or perhaps phrased more carefully, in the possibility of human progress. In McLuhan, progress and perfectibility are off the table. Yet I'd contend his view speaks with force to our current cultural and planetary moment. He avoids privileging Western modernist practices and judging earlier or non-literate people as relatively simple or unadvanced. Instead, McLuhan pictured earlier ages as just different from ours, with people in oral societies drawing on different resources. Indeed, he sometimes said that pre-literate people were imbued with a sense of the sacred, and in this way had it better, or maybe had more sense than we do. I think this is my final slide. Yeah, recent ecological and post-colonial criticism tirelessly critiques the belief in progress as dangerous and unfounded. They contend the story of human progress now has few acolytes, with so much evidence showing how human activities devastated the environment and planet. We find this line of criticism in the arguments of critical sociologist Martin Savransky, who defines the Anthropocene as a time after progress, a time when we've abandoned faith in progress. He tells us human progress was a key concept underlying Western development, a commanding or imperative idea whose all-pervading imagery, he says, promised moral, social, economic ascent, guided by reason and technology. According to Savransky, by the end of the 19th century, with colonizing projects going forward full tilt, progress had become not merely one idea among others, but a settled and almost universal faith. Updating this story to mid-century, when McLuhan was writing, the 50s and 60s, Savransky describes how developed countries continued to assert power, not by annexing territory, but by drawing up favorable global alliances and arrangements to control trade and resources. The point I want to emphasize is that McLuhan doesn't fit Savransky's commentary on what was typical of mid-century pervasiveness of the idea of progress. Indeed, McLuhan disengaged from this story an ideal, never promising progress, never encouraging us to aspire to this outcome, but instead calling on people to reactivate dormant senses, to become whole rather than perfect. I'll conclude by noting quickly that in my recent book, Crisis Then Is Now, I explore in full McLuhan's relevance to current problems in theory. He understood crisis as provoked by Western-led technological innovation and exploitation, and advised awareness and finding another way, avoiding down that path. Continuing down that path, excuse me. What my book also explores is that McLuhan is too frequently misread or misunderstood, presented as brushed off as a technological enthusiast, or maybe worse, an apologist for Western values and practices. What I've labored to establish today is that he disavowed Western superiority and did not associate extending Western values with progress. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jaqueline. And I think it's really interesting, this piece about innate yet dormant capacities, and how are those nourished? What is impossible that can come out of the relationships becomes very different than what one learns only from the past. And hopefully we'll hear more about that later. And next in this section, we have Paul Guzzardo from Argentina talking about recursive dialogues, bridging minds of the past with AI of the present. And Paul's work, he's the creative developer of the Player on the Quantum Stage, or PQS, a performance-led research project that confronts the approach of AGI as a cultural and civilizational threshold. Very interesting stuff here. So take it away, Paul. You there? Paul?
Mute.
Paul? I think you're muted.
Okay. Hello.
Hello?
Hello, I'm Gina Valenti, a member of the IGS board, and I'm here in Buenos Aires working with Paul Guzzardo on his latest group project called Player on the Quantum Stage, that involves collaborators from Argentina, England, Scotland, and the US. Let's welcome Paul Guzzardo's avatar/voice clone.
You turned off your screen.
We'll begin.
I mean, your video.
Turned off the screen. With a quote from
Playing.
Russell Vout, director of the
Second
Office
song.
of
There you
Management and
go.
Budget and a chief architect of Project
Sound.
2025. This book, this
No
agenda,
sound.
the entire Project 2025 is a plan to unite the conservative movement and the American people again.
Where's our sound? We lost the sound.
The sound It seems to be there. It's just at a sort of a low tone. I think if we mute the other audios, we'd probably be able to hear it if we listen in and turn the volume up. Do you want to try again, Paul?
Against elite rule in woke culture warriors. This opens the mandate for leadership, the playbook behind Project 2025. The playbook pits true patriots against a woke elite, pits identity against imagination, pits certainty against doubt. And as we all know, that playbook is not theoretical, it's being implemented now. But before this horror show could happen, there was a cultural failure decades in the making. And I want to be clear, I use the word horror deliberately, not as metaphor, but as warning. Because if Project 2025
We lost you again. Paul?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry. Why this isn't working.
is fully realized, and if it converges with artificial superintelligence in its
Let me.
From your phone. I don't know. Look at you.
It seems to just be dropping out.
All right, let's see if this opens up again. It's too bad.
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay.
most opaque and extractive forms, then we are not looking at a simple culture war. We are staring into the abyss of a not so soft fascism, one optimized by machine logic, shielded by patriotism, and animated by theocratic code. To help illustrate how quantum has explored this collapse, this decadence, I'll walk you through a sequence of 3 interconnected segments. That collapse was part of a line of lectures I gave last fall in Dundee, Newcastle, and Norwich. The presentations included I generated Queen Elizabeth avatar reading a paper of mine. The fake queen's opening and closing monologue will shortly follow. Following the queen, we move from the metaphorical stage to the literal street. This shift to the street is not new. It extends from an earlier body of work I've called recursive urbanism, a design activist practice that treated the city not just as a built environment, but as a thinking system. For years, this approach will begin by
Paul, it seems that the technology isn't really
Can I talk now? Can you hear me?
Please just speak. I think that's
Yes,
better.
okay, fine. Unfortunately, what we had was my avatar who's been silenced, who was reading the paper. And the paper was exploring the development of a project called The Player on the Quantum Stage, and it was introducing a series of aspects of this project. The project has been going on for the last 6 or 7 months. It's been involving myself and a large crew. One is a theater director in New York, a dramatist, Ian Belton. We're working on a script which involves Marshall McLuhan and Walter Ong in 1937. Curiously, 1937 is a critical year of Claude Shannon's a contribution to information culture. And why I was not planning to talk about this, but given the last presentation, I was aggressively involved with UNESCO in attempting to turn 1937 and St. Louis into a World Cultural Heritage Site based upon McLuhan, Shannon, and also Alan Turing, who published his uncomputable numbers that year. So I'm playing off a series. This has all been part of the Player of the Quantum Stage. Gina is working with me here in Argentina, and we're trying to open up a live streaming aspect of the quantum stage. And then you may have seen some drawings. Were those visible at some time? Those were from Mexico City. There was a proposal from Mexico City, and I'm dealing with some architects who are attempting to put together some mobile structures. So this is a multidisciplinary project, which is going forward. The video, again, was my clone, which went silent, describing the project. The Mexico City drawings are currently being developed architecturally by a group in the UK that I've been working with. They were presented in a series of lectures last fall in Norwich, Dundee, and Newcastle to engage a larger professional crowd in these ideas. The underlying idea is what is called recursive urbanism, that the stage is on the street, and that these accelerating information systems need to be developed on the street. My background, which is my connection with Lance, was I was for a long term a fellow at the Patrick Geddes Institute in Dundee. And Patrick Geddes is considered the grandfather, I guess, of media ecology, who developed the ideas that we're going to attend to information systems based upon the city as a design thinking machine. So all of this goes back to that. The other aspect which we weren't able to see, unfortunately, was a video avatar of Queen Elizabeth, which was playing in these various venues in the UK, where the avatar begins to describe the information world we're falling into and its consequences in terms of the issues which have been discussed in this symposium today, and its humanizing form. Unfortunately, it's not being shown because it's quite a moving, interesting piece. It was taken from a speech she gave to the US Congress, I think in 1999. And we were able to fashion her voice, and it becomes, I think, a very potent way of better understanding what was going on. The final segment, I'm trying to remember what my final segment was in terms of video.
Was McLuhan's. It wasn't McLuhan's avatar's voice.
Oh, and the final segment is a whole other series we had. We created a panel involving a AI interlocker played by Aldous Huxley, who's interviewing Korbinski, Walter Taylard, Desjardins, and McLuhan. And we created their voices. And there's a back and forth between the avatar and these individuals. You have to tell me about my time, by the way. Which, I've got 3 minutes. I should even read part of that script because the avatar, as he listens to these individuals, is then critiquing them based upon the model that a thinking machine would use in terms of I'm trying to pull out some of this. Am I still online? Okay. How you organize information. So we had this meta event, which is playing with an avatar of these characters. The piece is somewhat dramatized because in the middle of it, Jorge Luis Borges shows up. And so we have Borges talking to the avatar, and where Borges is basically claiming all of these characters have fallen into one of his stories. And what's the difference between a Borges story and this dynamic between all these individuals? So I am basically summarizing not only my presentation, but a series of projects, because the thought is that the panel of AI avatars having these conversations on the street can be changed in terms of who the panel is based upon the street. So if you were in Italy, you probably have Italo Calvino, all right? And if you were in Paris, you would have Jaqueline. And as these individuals, are you still hearing me? Because we're playing. And as these, this is a structure that would allow a level of reflexivity on the street regarding these sorts of ideas. And we haven't had those structures, okay? I mean, that was the large story that was coming out of my UK presentation. The delay in creating interface on the street that allowed us to better respond to these systems, what the consequences of that failure have been, and is it too late to begin again, all right? And those are issues which I think are extremely, extremely important. And unfortunately, I think it might have been a little more intelligible to this audience had those other systems played. But here you can see some of the architectural drawings. This is Korbinski, this is Walter in a series of projects we're designing, hopefully for installation, all right? I think, I've tried to correct what was lost.
But
Are you there?
yeah, thank you for doing that too. I was very curious. Technology here. Somehow I'm in your screen. That's also strange. But this organization of communication inside of all of these different ways in which our understanding of communication itself are changing with AI is just fascinating. So thank you very much for that. And we'll dig in a little bit, hopefully afterwards. I don't know if it's possible, but maybe people would like to see that video if you can share it.
I mean, I can send links,
That could be great. It seemed like it would be something that people would like to see, but
No, tienes que levantar y
tech
volver.
demons were not going to let it happen. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. And so the next piece that we have today is a piece on Robert Anton Wilson, the Generalist Semanticist. And our presenter is Gabriel Kennedy, who's otherwise known as Propanon. And this is a curious and exciting thing. So I just want to talk about Propanon for a second, that multimedia artist, concentrating on the written word, visual art, music, and he's appeared on boingboing.net, mondo2000.com, and lots of other places. This is sort of reaching into pop culture in a way that I think is exciting to see this work reaching. So go ahead, Gabriel, if you're here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Lance, for inviting me today to speak. Very nice to be here with everyone today. At the moment, I'm trying to pull up my share screen. So just having an off-camera producer help me with this. Okay, cool. Let's see if this works. Although, oh, here we go, share. Okay. So I just want to check, do people see the screen right now, the lecture?
Yeah.
Or do you just see my face?
We see the lecture.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll just head right into it. Robert Anton Wilson, the lecture, the title of my talk is called Robert Anton Wilson, the Generalist Semanticist. Robert Anton Wilson was an American novelist, journalist, teacher, sit-down comedian and nonfiction writer who's most known for the book Illuminatus Trilogy, which he co-authored with friend and colleague Robert Shea in the 1970s. Quick question, are people aware of that book in this group here, Illuminatus Trilogy? Kind of, sort of, not really? Okay. His influence throughout the later half of the 20th century until today has been consistently present, yet in true esoteric fashion, not well known. Today, I will argue that Wilson is both a generalist and a general semanticist at his core. So here's some pictures of Wilson. This is how most people tend to recall what Robert Anton Wilson looked like. He kind of rose to fame in a way in the past middle age, so he was kind of seen as this sort of old guy. These are the original covers for his Illuminatus trilogy books. They came out, I believe, in September, October, and November of 1975. Huge underground fiction success. The book is still sold, usually through word of mouth. It's a huge sort of cult. The book has a huge cult following. These were pictures I put in my book about Wilson. I should have let it be known. I wrote the first biography of Robert Anton Wilson called Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, just published in October of 2024. The book is a biography. It unpacks the influential contributions that Wilson made to contemporary culture, while also shining light on those who influenced him and his thinking. And just bringing back here to these early pictures of Wilson, I uncovered these. I was able to find these. So these are sort of like never before seen pictures of Wilson. To the left is Wilson's high school graduation photo from Brooklyn Tech in the year 1950. Wilson was born and raised in Brooklyn.
Gabriel, somehow sound has disappeared.
I think he froze, actually, not just a sound.
Yeah, he does look a bit still, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe he'll come back in.
Perhaps he's choosing his words very carefully.
Okay. My computer keeps
There you go.
falling off, so sorry about that. Let's see. I'll share the screen again. Okay. So yeah, so these are just some early pictures of Wilson. The one to the right is Wilson in 1962. He was living in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and he was part of a thing called the School of Living. It was a sort of libertarian, anarchist, sort of socialist school. There he is, local anarchist Bob Wilson makes a point at Tuesday's Sex Cuba Talk Out. So this occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Bob was never afraid of being seen as ridiculous to make his point. He had a great sense of humor. And as you can see, that's the same photo I have for the cover of my book. Okay, so in 1948, at the age of 16, Wilson, while perusing the stacks of a New York City public library, discovered Science and Sanity, an introduction to non-Aristotelian systems and general semantics by Alfred Korzybski. The book answered the question for Wilson, what is reality? And of course, those who are schooled in general semantics know that Korzybski applied the multi-ordinal understanding of the word reality, meaning that it's just a word that means different things for different people. But for Wilson, this was a huge insight, discovering this at the age of 16. I should say that he was also raised in a pretty strict Catholic environment up until the age of 13. So that I'm sure left a certain imprint on his viewpoint. People viewed things only one way within that reality tunnel. Wilson read the passage of the book where Korzybski explained that stage magicians accomplish feats of illusion through the audience's willingness to be deceived. The audience wants to be deceived by the magician or the showman or the shaman or the sham man or the president. People tend to make more hasty generalizations throughout the day when we realize that we tend to fill in the blanks and sometimes let people make decisions for us. Korzybski said that he wanted to help people, quote, use their nervous systems most efficiently. And so Wilson, after reading this book in 48, he continued to read Science and Sanity every year for the rest of his life. It should be noted that Wilson wrote that he read Science and Sanity in one weekend at the age of 16. As everyone here knows, that's an 800-page plus book. So that's a fairly good accomplishment. I had to take him on his word on that. I couldn't find anyone to contradict that. So he continued to read Science and Sanity every year for the rest of his life. Wilson was a giant math nerd while at Brooklyn Tech, so he loved Korzybski's approach, especially Korzybski's attempt to...
questions.
Okay, can we save the questions until after? Wilson, who was a giant math nerd at Brooklyn Tech, loved Korzybski's approach, which was to make the English language like calculus. So I'd say reading Science and Sanity at 16 trained Wilson's mind to eventually venture into his first occupation before writing, which was engineering. In the early 1950s, young Wilson began attending meetings at the New York Society for General Semantics. Korzybski's wisdom stayed with Wilson. For instance, the statement, quote, any proposition containing the word is creates a linguistic structural confusion, which will eventually give birth to serious fallacies. Korzybski's goal was to help people, quote, experience their nonverbal silent levels of existence and to, quote, delay their evaluations rather than react to stimuli with automatic unconscious responses or semantic responses, I believe, right? So Bob and Bucky. In 1955, at the age of 23, Robert Anton Wilson saw Buckminster Fuller, the American inventor, lecturer, and writer, give a talk at the annual Alfred Korzybski Lecture in upstate New York. Wilson was blown away by Bucky's description of the term synergy. Synergy deals with, quote, the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts specifically. Fuller believed firmly that the enemy of synergy is specialization. Humans need to learn as many new skills, trades, sciences, and crafts as soon as possible. One must learn like their hair was on fire. This is a picture of one of Wilson's books, and this is actually one of his drawings. And of course, he has the phrase there, specialization is for insects. Wilson's philosophical approach to life stresses the work to become a generalist in the Buckminster Fuller sense, and to not get trapped in specialization, which of course he viewed as a limited way of life. Alfred and Bucky, Bruce Kottish, author of Korzybski, a biography, notes that Fuller focused on what is and can be known about the world, however, by not neglecting the knower. Fuller, quote, sought comprehensive knowledge of the structure of the universe in order to develop universal design principles, while Korzybski, quote, focused on what could be known about the knower, not neglecting what is and can be known about the world. Korzybski designed, quote, universal methods of evolution based on a comprehensive search to understand the structure of human knowledge. Wilson was aware of this tension and sought to synthesize the synergetic generalism of Fuller with Korzybski's general semantics. In 1957, Wilson also read the Alan Watts book, The Way of Zen, which sparked a lifelong interest in Buddhism and other Asian and South Asian wisdom traditions. Wilson begins a friendship with Watts in the late 1950s, and Alan becomes a mentor to Bob until Watts' death in 1973. So Raw's synthesis, what is it? So Wilson's work is a constant practice of integration and synthesis. For instance, in the late 1950s, he was intersecting insights learned from Korzybski those learned from Fuller and Watts and also Wilhelm Reich. A specific example of this is what Korzybski called the nonverbal silent level. And as you see to the right is the diagram of the structural differential and the event process level, of course, being at the top. And then underneath it are the series of filters that, our human, I guess, brain contains of how we filter out stimuli and information to make sense of the world. When Wilson came engaged with this notion of the nonverbal level, he of course found, what he called an isomorphism or similarity with the Zen Buddhist state of mind of just, no words or no thing. And of course, there's much literature dedicated to the notion of entering the Satori state where one escapes the tyranny of words, to quote Stuart Chase. It's there that we're able to access perhaps what Wilson eventually calls a re-imprinting or a reconditioning, or in more religious terminology, a spiritual rebirth. General semantics techniques that Wilson used in his work. So these are just some examples. Wilson was a lifelong general semanticist. It was seen throughout many of his works. The New Inquisition, which was published in 1987, utilizes the uncritical inference test. This test, invented by William V. Haney and used in general semantics seminars. Haney's test presents a series of questions and asks the reader to categorize statements as either true or false. Wilson, in true Wilsonian style, extended the true-false answers to 7 categories of logical classification. Throughout the book, he asks readers to place 20 propositions within any of the 7 slots. The categories are as follows. Statement can be true, false, indeterminate, meaningless. It can be a game rule. It could be self-referential, and it can be a strange loop. In Quantum Psychology, Wilson's 1991 book, he writes the whole book in E prime, which is English without the is of identity. One phrase that he also uses in quantum psychology is the Korzybski phrase, organism as a whole interacting with environment. And Wilson added as a whole. Contemplating this phrase leads to Zen breakthroughs and helps direct one's awareness to the silent nonverbal level. Personally, anecdotally, I have spent, weeks, separate weeks at a time, thinking constantly about my organism as a whole interacting with an environment as a whole. And I could say that it does affect one's thinking in a very beneficial way. Perhaps I'm using my neocortex more. And Everything is Under Control, Cults, Conspiracies, and Cover-Ups, Wilson's 1998 Chrysanthemum or Encyclopedia of Conspiracy Theories. Wilson argues that most conspiracy theories lose their emotional teeth once they are phrased in E prime. He believed that E prime undermines the dogmatism in most of these ideas. Of course, his most well-known book that discusses the insights of Korzybski and Buckminster Fuller is his book Prometheus Rising, published in 1983. Wilson applied the work of Korzybski, Bucky Fuller, Alan Watts, Aleister Crowley, as well as Timothy Leary's psychological map, the Leary Circumplex, to create he and Leary's psychological model, the 8-circuit brain model. The 8-circuit brain model is Wilson's largest contribution to understanding human consciousness and to generating the ability to become true generalists who are unbothered by, as I said, the tyranny of words. And this is just a page of works cited for the lecture. And that's it. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. It's interesting to see how all of these pieces are sort of refracting and diffracting together into some questions and explorations around where is the communication and how are we within it and making it So how do we get an understanding of that? So I'm going to open it up to the room. I know lots of you have lots of questions and thoughts, and I guess you can propose them either to the individual speakers or just in general. So the floor is open. If you want to raise your hand, go ahead. Thank you so much, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Anybody want to bring anything in?
Gabriel, I just want to point out that Haney's uncritical inference test has 3 answers because it's a fact inference test, and facts can be true or false as statements. And the third possibility is an inference, which is a statement that cannot be determined true or false based on the available evidence, but could be determined true or false if more evidence were made available. And that goes back to Whitehead and Russell and their work on propositional logic.
Thanks for that clarification, Lance. Yeah, I like that.
Still less than 7, but
right.
Yeah, I guess Jesse first, and then Paul and Ryan.
Make sure to unmute. Thank you very much. This is an amazing series of talks. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to hear this wide range of far out ideas and observations that are very useful. My question comes from one of the first talks that mentioned that time binding allows for learning from experience. One of the things I've studied is a recurrent pattern in human history of sort of time unbinding, of civilizations collapsing and not passing on their knowledge, and that this is something that actually can be associated with the more technological civilizations, and particularly the ones that grow to collapse, like we're doing at the moment. There's 4 we know quite a bit about. Well, 3 we know quite a bit about. The first one we know in history is the collapse of Babel, and its accurate depictions of cultural change during the process in the Bible is what I associate with as evidence of it being the kind of cultural collapse that erases the knowledge of the culture. And then, of course, Atlantis, which was the Greek Levant, Crete, Phoenicia collapse at the late Bronze Age, and then Rome, and now us, who see growth as a constant, even though in nature growth is the most disturbing, ever more rapidly accelerating, reorganizing process. It's also what explosion is, if not transformed, as organisms have learned, but we haven't. Organisms learn to grow up, prompted by being cut off from their original source, or like in an egg running out of room, you have to grow up, and then do these observations reflect on the big ideas everyone else has talked on?
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, maybe we can hear from a few questions and then see what comes up in a few moments. We haven't got much time here, but Paul, what did you want to offer?
Obviously, you didn't hear my presentation, nor did you hear the Queen's presentation, but they focused on those issues. It's to what extent, we're falling into kind of the bottom of Poe's whirlpool. In fact, the Queen's presentation opens up with telling the Poe story and the broader implications of living in this time. And in fact, she ends with a series of alternative events going on in the bottom of that hole. So there's no question that given what we're going through right now on a day-to-day basis, and that this symposium is being held in, at this time, that one would be mad if one wasn't focused in addressing this downward spiral. There's nothing more to say.
Thank you. Yeah, and Paul Levinson, go ahead.
Yeah, well, just briefly, first, congratulations to both Gabriel and Jaqueline for putting out their books. And I don't know whether this sounds like a threat or a consolation or whatever, but they're both at the top of my reading list for this summer. So I'm looking forward to reading both of your books. But I do have a brief, serious question. If each of you could answer it just very briefly, because we don't have much time. Gabriel, what do you think Wilson would think? And Jaqueline, what do you think McLuhan would have to say about the currently deplorable political situation that we all recognize we're in?
I mean, I think that Wilson had he was in touch with what he called hilaritas. He had a lot of joy. He was a radical optimist I place in my book in the tradition of Viktor Frankl. His magic was about finding meaning in life, and that ultimately the most important thing is your awareness and the joy that you can access in your life. I think he was very much in touch with that. He laughed at the foot of death. His last message to the world was death is absurd. However, he is on record of saying that he thinks Donald Trump is quote unquote fucking crazy. That was almost 30 years ago. So I think there's your answer right there.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. I don't think McLuhan would find it funny. I think he would see it in line with his more apocalyptical projections and say, this is what where he hoped we wouldn't be, and maybe wouldn't even have imagined. But a lot of it, there's so many times he talks about things falling down, structures that we've depended on, but I don't think he would see this with glee. It's a kind of transformation that's taking place without the kind of control that he really wanted. So yeah, your author is a more pleasant one. He's more of a humorist, because I don't think McLuhan would find it funny at all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the presentations. Jackie, I really appreciated yours, and I too am looking forward to reading your book. But my question is actually for Zach and the Shannon Weaver model. I'm just a little bit kind of curious if you could speak maybe a little bit more to the maybe media environment that Shannon, or mostly Shannon, I guess, right, and Weaver were responding to, and how that model, or did that model emerge, right, given the constraints in the media environment of post-World War II America, and kind of based off of that, does it still have the same type of purchase that it at this particular time, given the kind of multi-directional, if you will, nature of digital media and AI, et cetera? If that question makes any sense.
Well, that's a tough question, Ryan. So thank you for it. I appreciate it. You know, to go back, yes, it originates out of World War II. In fact, many scholars actually think that Shannon had developed his model during World War II, but it was classified, and so it wasn't able to be released and published until 1948. As a model of communication, again, I'm going to make that qualifier there. You know, I think it has limitations. I tried to make that abundantly clear in my presentation. But if we're looking at it as a schematic diagram of a communication system, or as someone put in the notes, of a schematic diagram of a data transmission system, even more specifically, then yes, I think it still applies. The fundamental nature of Shannon's diagram is still applicable today. It's important to keep in mind that he made it very general, so it could apply to any data transfer system. And many of his principles and different theorems in information theory are still being used today. It was responsible, I think 3 different theorems were used in the rollout of 5G with cell phones. There were different theories that have been used in the development of AI. So everything from data compression to AI, we really see that it's still being used. So yes, I still think as far as from a telecommunication standpoint, that it is very applicable, and we have seen a variety of different graphic models come out in the field of telecommunications specifically that expand on Shannon's diagram in order to outline a variety of different ways that these systems operate.
Great. And Sean, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would submit that this moment broadly is a moment of transmission of transition to a domain in which we are experiencing a merged mental model following the World Wide Web. So imagine a situation where there is a place, in effect, in the cloud where our mental models might be merged. And instead of us engaging in merely engaging in flinging speech acts at one another, we can transition to a co-curation of our merged mental model. I would submit that that is the transition that is available to us and that we really ought to embrace in this moment. Over. That will take software support.
Yeah, I wonder if it's ever possible to not be co-creating those. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Thank you, Nora. Just to finally add, sort of perhaps answering an earlier question about, I mean, it is a dire moment that we're in. But one thing that Wilson always stressed, he liked to use the story of the, person Nasruddin, which was a sort of Sufi story he got from Idris Shah, 1970s writer, but which was basically, even when you're at the gallows pole, even when you're at death's door, like it's a strength to remain optimistic. One may die, but you must always look for every opportunity to, quote unquote, escape the prison. And in order to escape any hard situation, you need to exercise a tremendous amount of awareness, more than you normally use. And this pushes your concentration to another level of perhaps humanity. And I think that this is what Wilson was seeking to stress, and to finally add some scientific theory to that. He loved, I guess, referencing the work of Ilya Prigozhin, the physical chemist, who spoke of dissipative structures, and that any dissipative structure is highly complex and very unstable. But it's this complexity that's the strength, because it's the complexity that might break through to another level of coherence. And so things change, but humanity, although as dark as it seems, there may still be this push towards the next level of evolution where hopefully everybody can get along, the global north and the global south, and there's no exploitation through appropriation or extraction. So I just wanted to add that, the importance of radical optimism in moments like this.
Mhm. And I think, coming back to the title of this session as a whole, of mind and nature, that recognizing those, my dad used to talk about the complexity of the individual, the complexity of culture and social structures, the complexity of the biological world, and all of these complexities informing and shaping each other. So,
Norma, could I interrupt for a second on that question? I don't know how to put my hands up. This is Paul, okay?
yeah.
Unfortunately, part of the panel was Desjardins that I was trying to play. I was able to get a hold of maybe there are only 2 audio recordings of Chardin, and I did clone those recordings. And the purpose was to address those sorts of issues, since his new sphere offers, a rather complex and a system of evolution into Christ. And I think, again, I'm really interested in what are the mediums that we can address that push these ideas out there. And not diminishing the nature of a symposium, but it still has a system of we're all talking to ourselves. And the issue of whether these technologies and this current, crisis state might be responded to with some sort of sense of hope. Not only requires that we use these individuals that we're talking about, that we desperately need to create other media systems. And I'll go back to the father of media ecology, Patrick Geddes. I mean, Patrick Geddes, Lewis Mumford, these are the individuals who recognize that we desperately need the city, the street, as a way of, creating some sort of flaneur that we would hope would possibly reach a higher level. So I tossed that out there from my architectural design background.
Or another level. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everyone on the panel. Your papers and work is beautiful, and it was an honor to host you. I'm going to hand it over to Lance now for the closing remarks. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you, Nora, and I'll be very brief here because it's been quite a marathon. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone who participated in our online symposium, and to everyone who showed up to take part in it by just attending and asking questions, or simply by listening. I want to reiterate that we encourage you all to come join us in all that we're doing and become members, encourage others to become members of the Institute of General Semantics. We have our journal, etc., that goes with membership that Tom Gencarelli edits and is always looking to publish new material of interest to our membership. We publish books and have some very exciting new books coming out in the coming year. And we have events coming up as well, including in New York City on April 29th, a memorial for Gary Gumpert, along with a screening of a 1960 broadcast featuring Marshall McLuhan that almost no one has seen before. We'll be at the Media Ecology Association's annual meeting in Mexico City, taking place on June 5th to 8th. And immediately following that, on the 9th through 11th, we'll be having our summer seminar in Mexico City. And we invite you all to come and join us for one or both of those things, those events. And in the fall, we'll be having our annual Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture in New York City on October 3rd. This year featuring Tristan Harris of the Social Dilemma fame, along with being followed by a symposium over the weekend, October 4th and 5th, that will have the theme of discourse, dialogue, and democracy. We'll also have an online reading group devoted to last year's new edition of General Semantics seminar, the Olivet College Lectures by Alfred Korzybski. And we'll have more courses and other online events and in-person events coming up. So please come and be a part of this. We are obviously not going to solve all the world's problems by ourselves, but what we do have to offer are ways of thinking and understanding and responding to what is going on in the world today that will hopefully help in bringing us through these troubled times into a better future. And we want you all to be a part of it. So thank you all again, and best wishes for this holiday weekend and for the world to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, everybody.